Hello, I'm Melinda Nusafora and welcome to this special edition of Straight Talk, where we'll review the biggest events that impacted Turkey this year. No story has arguably hit the Turkish leadership more and put Turkey in the spotlight than the murder of Saudi journalist and government critic Jamal Khashoggi. It all started on the 2nd of October when Khashoggi enters the Saudi consulate in Istanbul and never comes out. The next day, Saudi authorities confirm Khashoggi's disappearance but insist that he left the consulate alive and well. In a statement, officials say he requested paperwork and exited shortly after. 9 days after Khashoggi's disappearance, Turkish investigators are still denied access to the consulate. However, a specialised Saudi cleanup crew, including a toxicologist, arrive in Istanbul and begin daily work at the site. Finally, on October 15th, Turkish investigators searched the consulate for more than 8 hours, removing a range of samples from the building. More than 2 weeks after his disappearance, Saudi Arabia finally acknowledges that Khashoggi was killed, but say it was a fist fight inside the consulate. 18 people allegedly connected to the killing are arrested, and 2 officials close to Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman are fired. After weeks of coordinated leaks, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan announces that Khashoggi's killing was premeditated and planned at the highest levels of the Saudi government. That forces Saudi Arabia's hand, and 2 days later, the public prosecutor changes his stance and describes the murder as premeditated rather than an accident. In November, Saudi prosecutors announce the kingdom will seek the death penalty for 5 out of the 11 people charged in the murder. He simultaneously exonerates the Crown Prince of any involvement. At the end of November, US President Donald Trump is still backing MBS, claiming that there is nothing definitive linking the Crown Prince to Khashoggi's murder. Now, that puts him at odds with the US Senate, which in December passes a non-binding resolution that says Mohammed bin Salman is responsible for the killing of Jamal Khashoggi. Almost 3 months on, and there's still plenty to dissect. Joining me in the studio is Matthew Bryza, a former US ambassador to Azerbaijan, and Talip Kucukcan, who is a senior fellow at the TRT World Research Centre and was also a member of the Turkish Parliament until June this year. Gentlemen, thank you for breaking down 2018 with us. Matthew, I'm going to start with you. The death of Jamal Khashoggi was arguably the biggest news story in the world for the 2 months after his death. But since then, it started to drop out of the headlines a little bit, and there hasn't been any real tangible kind of repercussions for Saudi Arabia. After all the talk, after all the international condemnation, is it just business as usual now for the Crown Prince?
Well, it's not just business as usual because there's just been a reshuffling of the Saudi government. It would appear that some of the people who were closest to the Crown Prince in the most sensitive positions have lost those positions or been demoted. And the former finance minister, who had been imprisoned under the Crown Prince's authority during that so-called crackdown, is back and in a very senior position as foreign minister. So there have been some repercussions, but the big one that people wondered about, would the Crown Prince lose his status as the Crown Prince?
I mean, those seem to just be on the sidelines, doesn't it? The big one is the Crown Prince himself.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, it was never likely that he would lose that authority as the Crown Prince. He's been chastised, he's been reined in, but as you said, unfortunately, the game that the Crown Prince was playing, together with Donald Trump to let the clock run out, seems to be ensuing. And I just hope that people do keep the story alive. I'd like to add that I think the Turkish government handled this in a way that surprised many people with its skill. By keeping the story alive as long as it did through the step-by-step leaking of information that never would have been known otherwise.
It's interesting you say that, because that leads me on to the question I've got for you, Talip. This incident escalated so quickly from an international murder plot up to a diplomatic disaster for both Turkey, Saudi Arabia and the United States. It put all three of them at loggerheads. Turkey, as you say, Matthew, played its hand really quite well. It was in a compromising position. During this whole political, diplomatic stoush, how do you think Turkey has fared throughout?
I think right from the beginning of this incident, unfortunate incident, Turkish government was prepared to bring things into the light. Therefore, whatever Turkey had at the time, the government started to share it with the international community, including its allies, and also including the Saudi Arabia, to encourage the Saudis to be more open on this issue. Otherwise, I think everybody would have forgotten the issue. It was Turkey and the Turkish government consistently wanted to shed light on the crimes, and also in the beginning you would remember that the Saudi authorities denied any involvement in it, but later on when Turkey started to share the evidence and also the talks, this shocking talks and the conversations. And also the information, these 17 guys who came to Turkey and then they took part in the killing. I think it is it's a sad story, but I think Turkey brought it to the light. Unfortunately, you know, in the beginning,
diplomatic stance shifted a little bit. Has it sort of maybe gained a little bit more control, maybe a little bit more power?
I think if you want to press Saudi government, Saudi authorities, Turkey cannot do everything on its own, and Turkey therefore wanted to share all the information with the US, with the European Union, and with all other, I think, governmental agencies, etc. And it was the duty of the international community. Turkey cannot solve the whole issue on its own. The internal, I think, dynamics are here, and the investigation is going on, and we do our full cooperation with the Saudi government, Saudi authorities as well. But what we see here is that I think, in my view, Turkey has done its own, I think, share. But the international community, unfortunately, as Bryza just hinted, I think there was that double standard. When we talk about the openness, when we talk about transparency and accountability, I think the international community terribly failed in questioning the Saudi government and Saudi authorities. Yes, now there is a shuffle. Some people lost their jobs. But the guy who is supposed to be the main, I think, culprit in that incident, he keeps his job. I think he will remain there because the incident it is not going to die away, but I think, as you have said, it is not going to be top priority in 2019.